Thank you very much. So, okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for coming. Today, in this talk, I'm going to present the review that I've done on StackOverflow cases tagged with Kubernetes. The first thing I want to say before showing the data is that it's true that I'm going to show some information and some data that I've researched, but most importantly, this is a call for action. So in the end, we're exploring the user base, and what I think is important here is to come up with ideas or come up with several questions on how we could improve the user experience in Kubernetes in general. That's what I think it's important. That's the real value of being here in KubeCon. So that's my aim. So that's what I want you to do today. So without further ado, let me just do a brief introduction about why we're doing this, why myself and why at Bitnami we've gone through the StackOverflow questions in Kubernetes. Well, at Bitnami we have one core value, and it's to empower our users. I don't know how many of you know the story of Bitnami, the history, but we've been doing it since the very beginning, since when we had installers, cloud images, multi-tier deployments, and of course the Kubernetes landscape is no exception. So we would like to improve the user experience when they work with our containers, with our Helm charts, with our applications like BKPR, Kube apps, and of course in the trainings that we provide. So with this idea, we want to improve the user experience in this area. The question will be how. So in our experience, one of the things that has worked for us is to basically listen to what users have to say. Go to a user base and try to find out what their needs are, what they struggle with. And this is what we're going to do in the case of Kubernetes. So we want to see what people struggle the most. We want to see how people use Kubernetes, what applications they normally use, and more importantly, what we can do. So we want to improve our user experience. We know that as going to the user base works. So, okay, where are we going to go to find this information? As a first step, we decided to go to StackOverflow. I suppose that this QA site requires little introduction. I suppose that once in our lives at least, StackOverflow saved the day of our daily development, right? So some bits of data has around 10 million visits per day. Every day, around 7,000 questions are created in different topics. And what's more interesting, we had a wide variety of profiles. So we have since front-end developers, DevOps, sysadmin, students. So this variety this heterogeneity of users is an added value to, I think, we have invaluable information that we can extract here. So, okay, now we know what we want to do, where we're going to do it. So what exactly we've done. Basically, we're going to review this year, 2018, and we've gone through around 1,000 questions that were created in this year, ordered by views. And we tried to extract basically which kind of issue the user had, why the issue happened, if possible, what platform they were using, and which application they were trying to deploy. We tried to attempt to extract these 4 bits of data. So, okay, this presentation will go through a series of questions. And as we're here at KubeCon, we see that Kubernetes has a really important momentum at this moment. The first question is, okay, according to StackOverflow, how relevant Kubernetes is becoming? This hype, this interest that it currently has, is it also being transferred to StackOverflow? Well, by the way, feel free to participate at any moment. So we're here to try to find out what we can do. So, well, in this case, what we see, if we go through the number of questions created every year, we see that it's doubling every year. So this year, around 7,000 questions were created around Kubernetes. So we see there's a tendency of going double and double and double, which is remarkable. And this means that we have more use cases, more user experience issues, also more concepts. There's a lot of challenge here. But also, it's interesting to see how it compares to other orchestration platforms. So the next, what I checked is, okay, how does it compare for example, OpenStack, Nomad, Docker Swarm? I also added Heroku. And if we see the number of questions created, we see that all of them combined are more or less the equivalent of the questions that we have for Kubernetes, even more if we add OpenShift. So we see, we're confirming that indeed Kubernetes is having an important moment. We see Heroku here. I was hesitant to add it or not. That has a fair share. If we see also the tendency of questions being created every year, we see that while Kubernetes is growing, this is the percentage of Stack Overflow. Kubernetes is going up, going up, going up. Heroku is more or less stable. So we still see that. It also confirms that we are in a good moment for Kubernetes and more adoption we're getting. However, if we put it into more, if we go a bit further, how does it compare to the top categories in Stack Overflow? So is it going, how important is it becoming compared to the others? So if we go to the top categories, we have programming languages like JavaScript or Node.js or Java. Do you think, I'll put it into the air, do you think that Kubernetes is at the same level? Okay, just to put an example, this year around 7,000 Kubernetes questions were created. How do you think it compares to, for example, the JavaScript questions created in Stack Overflow? I'll leave some seconds. Well, in a month, the amount of JavaScript questions is triple to the amount of Kubernetes questions in a year. So as we can see here in this graph, this small line there at the bottom is the tendency that Kubernetes is having. Of course, it still has a long way before becoming one of the top categories. However, so as we can see, there's still opportunities, and maybe we're still at a moment that it still needs more adoption within the community. However, so I'm happy because I think there's more things that we can do yet to make it go to one of the top categories, which may be a bit bold, but I think there's a lot of things that we still can do. However, in order to do so, there's one question we need to answer. When Kubernetes users go to Stack Overflow to find when they have issues, do they find the solution? The truth is that not yet. So around 37% of the questions are solved, whereas around 62% are still not solved. So there's an issue here. So we have users, Kubernetes users, they want to go to Stack Overflow to find answers, and there's a big number of them that don't get the solution to their answers. So once again, we still need to think, so how we can do to try to increase the amount of people that find solutions. If we want to get adoption, we need to have a big knowledge base that helps users to find solutions to their common issues. So what we could do? Well, one solution that I think that could be useful is to think about what kind of questions your survey has. So I'm going to go to a coarse grain division to a finer grain one. I don't know how many of you are experienced with Kubernetes, but there's currently like two curricula. Which one is the Kubernetes application developer and the Kubernetes administrator? In this sense, the application developer, according to the CNCF, can design, build, configure, and expose cloud-native applications in Kubernetes. What does it mean? It means that it needs to know the basic Kubernetes objects, like deployment, services, stateful set, volumes. It needs to know how to use the API. It needs to know a bit about pod patterns because it needs to deploy applications in Kubernetes. It needs to know how to manage the application lifecycle with, for example, the upgrades, and also how to troubleshoot, do some basic troubleshoot of the applications in Kubernetes. Of course, it's cloud-native applications. They need to know how to develop cloud-native applications, containerized applications. So as you can see, I think most of us will fit into this category in this sense when we approach Kubernetes, because we are developers that want to deploy applications and to exploit the capabilities of cloud-native applications. OK, so that's one of the profiles. The other one is the Kubernetes administrator. People deploy applications in a cluster. Someone or some entity has to create the cluster, has to create the cluster to know, in order to create a cluster, needs to know about the Kubernetes architecture, the components it has. It needs to know about how to install controllers like ingress. It needs to know about logging, monitoring, maintenance of clusters, about authorization, RBAC. These are more, so it needs to know, I think, it needs to know what the application developer knows, plus more extra content in order to be able to administer a cluster. So the first question will be, what do we find the most in Stack Overflow? This question may be a bit simpler because Stack Overflow is mainly a developer community, right? So it makes sense that most of the questions are for application developers, right? It actually is, it's like that. So you can see that most of them are questions, the CKAD type, so application developer questions, around 60%. But there's also a fair share of questions regarding administration, even more than in other pages, like, for example, server fault, which is more aimed to sysadmins, for example. So, okay, so it makes sense currently. So if we try to solve the issues of application developers, we also help the onboarding in Kubernetes, right? Okay, this is a coarse grain division. Why don't we go to a finer grain? Okay, let's go to the CKD type of questions. When you read through the questions, more or less, if you want, what I've done is trying to classify in basically 4 groups. This is what I found. The first category is still about how, when it comes to creating deployments. That means I have my application, I want to create a pod, stateful set, basically, and I find issues with that. Or I don't know how to create it. Or I don't understand properly how the difference between a container and a pod and a stateful set. I still have questions about how, for example, use configuration like environment variables, how to perform liveness readiness checks, how to upgrade my application. So these kind of questions that we found, for example, use advanced operations like with cron jobs or operators. This is one of the main categories. In this sense, I also selected some highlights. We can see, for example, lots of issues in upgrading stateful sets. We see one that I find quite interesting, and maybe some of you have experienced, which is the pod dependency. So if I have my application and I have a backend, how do I make my application wait for the backend to be ready? For example, we see a lot of questions regarding that. Maybe it's not the right question. Maybe we're in a different paradigm. I don't know. But the thing is that we see questions like that. And also, I found, for those who are developing their custom applications and use private registry, I see a lot of user experience issues with that specific part. They try to use a private registry and something doesn't work. I don't know if you have the chance to work with that, to create the poll image secrets. People find lots of problems with that. So it may be worth also looking into that to see what's going on. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say a lot of questions so you can all think about your own case. Okay, second category, communication service and ingress. That means I have my application deployed and I want to make it accessible. I want to connect my my application with a backend. I create services, and things don't work well. It says I timeout, error, connection. So, for example, also we see issues with load balancer. I want an external IP, and it doesn't work. We see, and this one is, I think, is kind of interesting, issues with ingress. And not maybe using ingress on its own, it's when you want to use more advanced operations with ingress. You want to exploit the capability, for example, of the Nginx ingress controller, and you want to do more advanced operations, and ingress on its own doesn't seem to give what they need. For example, we're writing a URL. Then, when we want to use SSL certificates and HTTPS traffic, you see lots of issues regarding that as well. Also regarding more advanced object like headless services when it comes to stateful sets. So basically all including communication between internal and external in Kubernetes. So some highlights. For example, I see lots of cases of people not using the correct selector. And it seems something in principle simple, but people find issues with that. So would it be a way to maybe make that process easier? Maybe some validation tool, something that we could make to avoid these kind of issues. Also regarding HTTPS traffic, using certificates or the kind of redirection, we see lots of issues regarding that. And in the case of ingress, you can see also questions regarding non-HTTP traffic. They want to use an ingress rule for example, a database. And they don't know how to deal with that. Should they use ingress? Should they not? The thing is that there's some expectations regarding ingress, and maybe we're qualifying or improving. So it provides what some users demand. That's open to debate. Okay, I'll make it a bit faster. So third category, persistence. So volume. So the thing of adding external data to deployments in the form of volumes, but also config map or secrets. So, for example, they create volumes and it doesn't work, especially when, for example, in cloud providers. You see issues when mounting the volumes, especially because maybe they don't know how to properly mount it. If it's a file, and it's mounted like a directory, or especially in the case of secrets on config maps, this mounting thing doesn't seem to be fully understood. Permission issues, especially with the case of non-root containers. So they launch the application, they say permission denied. And this is really unique in each case depending on the cloud, for example. Also, regarding persistent volume claims, what's the difference between them? How do I use it in stateful set because it has like a template, for example? You see also concept issues regarding that. This is also something that I experienced myself, for example, in trainings. You see that it's not that easy to explain these kind of concepts. Also, how to debug these kind of mounting errors, where to look for this information. It's not that clear where I can find the cause of these issues. Okay, some highlights, for example, I said debugging mounting errors, and there's one regarding, for example, I see quite common, config map and secrets. When I update them, what happens? So should I restart my deployments? Should I remove it and recreate it? It's not clear. And so how to deal with that, with these kind of entities that sometimes need to be updated? What's the correct procedure to work with that? And finally, the development tools with application developers and want to create cloud-native applications. And normally, you will want to use, for example, develop containers with good practices. Which are those good practices? How to develop a Helm chart? What's the proper way to create it? I have my microservice application with several elements. How should this be translated into a Helm chart? And most importantly, we have a CI/CD, Jenkins, GitLab, for example. There are some plugins, but people find issues when integrating them because they want to develop containers application and they want a whole pipeline. So, some highlights. For example, how to design properly a Helm chart, and for example, Jenkins or GitLab, how to integrate them. So these are the 4 categories that I found for developers. Nice to think which is the one that causes the most issues. Maybe creating development, maybe services. Well, in this case, they're quite equal. But you see that, for example, in case of communication, it has the highest percentage of the cases, but there's also a high percentage of development tools. So there's a big opportunity to try to attack one of these categories. It seems to me, when I look into the cases, that maybe it would be interesting to have some kind of tool, some kind of even visual tool that help us to create the whole process. So from deployment to persistent to communication that validates that what we're creating actually has the effect that we want. Especially when you have health charts, it will be quite interesting to have this kind of tool that helps to avoid these kind of errors. Also, these idea development tools, maybe if they have some kind of solution that goes through all of this process, but because maybe several developers don't want to create the YAML or the Helm chart. Maybe there's an easier way to create it. Maybe there are patterns around that. Now that I hear KubeCon and I go through the booths, I start seeing some examples of tools that go through that way. Now now that I'm dealing with all those pie charts, now I go to a booth and I start thinking about, okay, which percentage is this attacking? So is this still helping the communication part, or this other solution helping, for example, development tools? So this is what most application developers deal with when they go to StackOverflow. So how can we help them? Another way to help them, I think, is to know which kind of applications they commonly deploy. Once again, StackOverflow is an application developer community, so it makes sense that, for example, one group is custom applications. But there's also infrastructure applications and web applications. In this sense, in StackOverflow, it seems quite clear that most of the people that enter there want to develop, they want to deploy their custom application. Either Node.js application, Java application, Go application, whatever. There's a huge amount of cases that cover that use case. But there's also of the other two, of the infrastructure and web applications as well. This, again, confirms the thing that there must be a way to make this process easier. But I want to go a bit also through the infrastructure ones. So which are the most popular in StackOverflow? I think most of us have dealt with one of those. I think there's little surprise in this case: MySQL, Mongo, Postgre, Elasticsearch, Redis, Kafka. In the end, these are infrastructure apps that help normally they have an application and they want to use some backend. So the common backends can be seen here. So MySQL, MariaDB, Mongo, Postgres. And I think it's important here to say that we have currently unstable Helm charts that for most of these applications, right? So it's important to make sure, and for example, the Helm community, that our charts cover most of the cases that we want, cover different topologies, have the production requirements that any application will require. In the case of Helm, it's important. In the case, and I'm happy to say, for example, in Bitnami, we have Helm chart for all of these applications. So the thing is that we need to continue improving this Helm chart, because I think the more it covers our use cases, then the less questions we'll have, the less problems these applications developer will have. Also, going to the web applications, well, the top 6 that I found: Jenkins, the blogging part from WordPress, GitLab. But in this case, we see clear that there's a huge percentage of people using, for example, Jenkins, that once again confirms the necessity of having a pipeline for developing applications. Most people, they deploy Jenkins, but then they want to integrate the pilot doesn't work. So you can see here the necessity, clearly. Also, we have WordPress, but we can see also GitLab. And SonarQube, Artifactory, they also aim for example, developers. So this is what I found in this case. So what can we do to improve this? We have help, Jenkins help chart. We had to Jenkins help chart at the moment. Do they easily integrate with a Kubernetes platform already running? Is it easy to configure? Once again, I insist, is there a whole solution that covers all this pipeline process? Well, now that we've gone through the application one, let's go to the administrator ones. It's a 40%, it's a good amount. And in this case, I found 3 categories here. First one, it has to do with cluster installation. So either from scratch, either using GVADM, COPS, some of us may find familiar, even cloud-managed applications. And you see issues with, for example, components like kubelet or kube controller manager. They have the cluster, they want to install it, and this component doesn't work correctly. They find issues with the container runtime, container D, or Docker, especially with networking. So one node doesn't contact the other. I want to deploy container networking and something goes wrong. Also issues with DNS. Because building a cluster, I don't know if any of you have done it, it's a complex process. Making all these components work sometimes is not that easy. So you can see several questions regarding these elements. For example, container networking. You see several issues, for example, with Minikube starting, which I think, if Minikube is one of the platforms that we want to use to onboard people in Kubernetes, it surprised me that there are so many cases that they do Minikube starts and it doesn't work. Call it because of an operating system they use. Maybe because of in case of macOS, the container technology, something goes wrong with VirtualBox and they have to use another one. I think we should really try to work also on that, on how to, because that's the way we onboard people in Kubernetes. If we want that amount of people to go there, we cannot allow ourselves to have, for example, these kind of issues. I also saw several questions regarding the Kubernetes dashboard, which surprised me as well, because I think that's also a way that people like to use Kubernetes. So it seems like there's a necessity of having like a visual way of deploying applications or creating their elements. For example, in the case KubeApps comes to mind, but maybe also for learning it could be interesting to have some visual tool that has, as I said before, for example, when you create services, you make sure that you're connecting the right ones. Lots of things to do. Second category, cluster maintenance. We have a running cluster and they want to do operations like, for example, debug a component that stops working. They want to add monitoring, logging tools like Prometheus. How does it work? How do I install it? How do I perform maintenance operations on a node? I want to remove all the pods. How do I do it? As you may imagine, doing the upgrade of a cluster, things go wrong. How easy is the upgrade process at the moment? Is there anything we can do to improve it? For example, in this case, I highlight cluster upgrades, also how to force the removal of pods, because for some reason you see several cases that they want to remove pods from a node and they don't seem to go away. They are stuck in a terminating process. How do I debug that? It looks to me like when I look into all these cases, there's an issue with finding the cause of the issue, with debugging. I think we should really try to improve our debugging tools in some way. I know it's not trivial, but there must be a way that we can make finding the cause of the issue of troubleshooting issues in Kubernetes easier. Then, this category I call API access. This is the last category. So you have a cluster, you want to add users. How do I make these users? Service account, certificates, OAuth. this is something in principle simple to configure a client in kubectl, but things don't work. For example, you get an error, for example, with RBAC, or you see that it's not accessing for some reason, it's not properly configured, it has no proper configuration, and it makes sense in the case, for example, in a private cluster. But you can see a lot of issues recently, for example, in EKS. I found several issues that they configure it, it's supposed to be semi-automated, but things don't work as it should. Maybe it's quite complex because it requires an external tool. I don't know. But the thing is that we can see issues here. And also, we see a lot of cases that, once again, how do I debug an RBAC error? Because you see this, in principle, it seems quite self-explanatory, but sometimes you don't know if it's an incorrect service account or what does this system : default means. We have to do also with concept issues. Well, of the three categories in this case, you can see they're quite similar. So you see that maintenance, installation, and API access share a big, more or less the same parts of the pie. And in this sense, I think, I don't know, you heard of BKPR, for example, there's a talk tomorrow. And if you're interested in, for example, attacking the cluster maintenance part, or also part of the cluster installation part, I recommend you to take a look. Because, as I said before, here in KubeCon, we start seeing several solutions that attack these cases. So I recommend you to take a look. Also, for the ingress and communication issues, I recommend you to go because you'll see that how a way to attack this kind of issues with automation, for example. Okay, and now the last question. And I think this one also has there's something interesting about that, which is which platforms they are commonly used. There's GKE, there's Minikube, custom cluster with kubeadm, AKS, using COPS, EKS, OpenShift, Rancher. There's several ways of creating Kubernetes cluster. What you see here, GKE has a big share, but I also see that Minikube and also custom cluster using kubeadm have an important part of the pie. And this has to do with something that I also found in several of the previous questions. And it has to do with the kind of users that goes to StackOverflow. You see, in most of the cases, we're not talking about users having Kubernetes in production and having issues. You don't see, in several cases, you don't see real production problems. Most of them have to do with people that are learning, people that are experimenting with Kubernetes, people that are evaluating for migrating their applications to Kubernetes. Oh, sorry. So I was discussing this because, so maybe, yeah, this relates to the first question that maybe there's a lot of traction, but we still need to have more adoption in order to have more production, more production cases. So, well, this helps us also to see and to think, okay, what we can do, right? So, to have more adoption and then start seeing more real production cases. Or maybe StackOverflow is not a platform. Maybe we need another platform. I don't know. But this is also something about the profile of the user. So, well, this is what I've tried to find. I went to StackOverflow, tried to see different questions, tried to learn more about the users. I come up with several questions myself that I share with you. But to summarize, we see that Kubernetes popularity is going really up. But in the case of StackOverflow, still, there's a long way to go, which is interesting. There's a challenge here, because I'm sure we can do more to have more question answered, to make people find solutions to their issues. And also, yeah, because we see that there's a lot of people trying to learn Kubernetes, still not really production cases in the questions, but that's something that we should help to make this transition easier. Okay, for example, we see that several cases we see several cases for application developers in creating deployments, services, how to integrate, to use persistent, and ensure that there's a lot of intersection between each of the use cases in this case. And it's more about these concept issues or something not well defined, some issues that sometimes are trivial. So, as I said before, it's clear that there's something we can do to try to simplify the process. Also, there's a clear need to how to improve the debugging of the tools, or maybe to add validation tools that validate not only, for example, deployments, but also or at least troubleshooting tools, or a clear troubleshooting guide. There's different ways. There's automation, there's also documentation. So we need more tools regarding that. So debugging and simplifying process. And just to finish, in the end, this is just an example. We've taken StackOverflow. It should be interesting to, for example, see GitHub, to see the Kubernetes Slack channel, and to compare and to see the different use cases. But what is clear here is that we need to provide a better user experience, and that's something we should never stop looking into. Not only in Kubernetes, but in all of them. But in the case of Kubernetes, I just think about this. Maybe, would it make sense to, for example, even have a special interest group just on user experience? Like something that is like on top of the different special interest group. Would it make sense to have one that is like a hub to the rest, to take a look at what people are struggling with and communicates that? So we can improve our tools, improve our documentation, also think about how we're designing Kubernetes. So yeah, would it make sense to have like SIGUTs, I don't know how to pronounce, how it will be called. I don't know, in the end, what I wanted to show here is that there are so many open challenges here. So I'd love to hear during KubeCon to take a look, to discuss, to see what we can do in this matter. Maybe there's, in one of the booths, we have one of the solutions that we have, that we require. Or maybe there's something new that we need to create. So, excuse me.
Oh yeah, I had a question. Have you guys thought about, since there's so many different flavors of Kubernetes, and so many different tools that overlay, have you thought of kind of coming up with like a developer pattern to say, hey, here's kind of one of a beginner stack. When I begin to ask questions, I kind of have a default profile I'm working with to make it easier to get questions answered versus you have to start off with, oh, I installed this, I want this version, I've done this, on this, and it seems like there's so many different permutations right now. It's very difficult for someone to start from like scratch to intermediate.
Well,
Or like persona almost. It's kind of a weird use of a persona for a way of simplifying it.
so you mean, well, for the case of cluster administration, there's Minikube. In principle, there's an easy way to install a cluster, have it running. But you mean something like just directly aimed to developers, stuff like that?
It's certain, like, hey, I'm starting out, let me just use this pattern, I'm using these 6 simple things, I'm not using a lot of other different plugins or anything like that, so I'm on a very standard base. So when I ask questions, it's got a bigger pool of people that can help me respond. It seems like we have a lot of unanswered questions.
I think it makes sense to have something like that. So, but we'll need to see if, as I said, StackOverflow is one platform. Maybe in GitHub we have some of the answers. But I'm sure that, and I think there's some cases around. If you Google, you see that there are some kind of solutions as well, just aimed for developers that try to simplify the whole process. But yeah, I think in the end we need to have this developer community also mature. I think also the cloud native approach is still new. But yes, I think it makes sense totally to have this kind of community and maybe this aim. So this pattern that just goes to very simple cases of an application. So Helm charts, we could have Helm charts, for example, just for this kind of developments. I don't know, there's an open world in this sense to have this kind of challenge. Also, that's why I come here. I just want to try to think about that. So, well, basically that's what I wanted to say. So thank you. Just if by the end of this talk you also try to think about these issues and the necessity of having to improve this user experience, then I'm happy. Hope that you enjoyed the talk. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm here to respond or to debate or to whatever.